All right, folks, I'm Miss Blank, and welcome to Part 1 of Unit 4, the Founding Period of the United States of America. I'm very excited. This is Part 1 in a series of PowerPoint presentations that I'm going to share with you. So without further ado, let's get going. Special note, this PowerPoint does not contain everything, so if you look for it to contain everything, you will be disappointed and sad because it doesn't. Many of the content items will be discussed in class. There's also a lot more to come in my other 3 PowerPoint presentations that will be forthcoming. So hold on to your hats. Let's go. Ooh, pretty effects. All right, so introduction to political philosophy of our founding fathers. What were these people all about? Well, I'm going to tell you what political philosophy is in just a minute, because some of you might be wondering what that is. But we need to start out with this key question up here, that what is the proper role of government? This is what our founders were really concerned about. This is what they wanted to answer, that this is what our system of government answers for the world, what their view of the proper role of government should be. Should it be big? Should it be small? Is a very, I guess, simplistic way of saying it. They had bigger questions in mind than just should it be big or small. But this was the main central issue they had to address. I mean, do we want a big, powerful government that's in control of everything, or do we want a smaller government that gives us some individual liberties? So now, what is political philosophy? Well, basically, it's the study of human social organization and of the nature of man and women in society. What does that mean? Well, it's the examination of how society should be organized, how men and women interact in that society, and what their role is. Now, in our instance, we're talking about government, so we're looking at the role that government should play in our society. So, do you know the political philosophy of our founding fathers? That's okay, I'll tell you. Ooh, classical liberalism. Good times. Now, I want to make an important point here. When people hear the word liberal or liberalism, they tend to think of modern Democrats, modern people who are on the left end of the spectrum, and that is not correct. Classical liberalism was a whole different kind of political philosophy, and we're going to talk about the details of what that was, but it was a philosophy based on a guy I know you've heard of, John Locke, and this is a quote from him up here at the top. Every man has property in his own person. This nobody but has a right to but himself. So that pretty much encompasses John Locke's view on the whole thing. So what is classical liberalism? Let's a little bit of review here for a little bit, because I want to make sure we're all on the same page. We need to remember that our founders were children of the Enlightenment. They were very mistrustful of government. I mean, after all, they were massively beaten about the head by a strong central monarchy from very far away. So they were pretty ticked off. So they started a war. Luckily, we won. But they believed that they deserved certain rights because we exist. Rights because we are human. Government does not have a right to mess with those rights. And those rights are called natural rights. John Locke specified those rights. He said it was life, liberty, and property. The government does not give that to you. We just have it because we're human. Thomas Jefferson, with the Declaration, added the pursuit of happiness as well. So what are the characteristics? What really is classical liberalism? Well, basically, it's the belief in liberty. It's the belief that we have freedom, that rights don't come from government. Government can't give them to us. They can't take it away. They're ours. We get them because we're human, because we exist. So below here you see some key characteristics of classical liberalism. Now I would like for you guys, as a formative assignment, to translate these into your own words so we can have a nice class discussion about what these things are and what they mean. Limited government, rule of law, avoidance of arbitrary or discretionary power, the sanctity of private property and freely made contracts, and personal responsibility. So I would really love it if you guys would take each of those characteristics and put them in your own words, kind of tell me what they mean to you, and then that'll give us a nice foundation for the start of our class discussion on this subject. So like I said before, just a review, there are 2 types of liberalism. Classical liberalism is our focus, not 20th century. But just so you're aware, that's a very basic breakdown of what those 2 things are. And that is the end of part 1. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. And I will see you next time.
Hi folks, back again for the Founding Period Part 2. I've actually turned my webcam off for this lesson because I think my webcam is not exactly up to the challenges of capturing the blankness. So I don't want to make you guys dizzy, so here we go. Special note, again, this PowerPoint does not contain everything. A lot of what we need to go over we will discuss in class, and they will also show up in future PowerPoints. So please be sure to check my updates page frequently. So now, this PowerPoint is going to be all about the Constitution and the New Republic. So we're looking at 1776 to 1800. In this PowerPoint, we're focusing on the Constitution itself and the key things that were inside of it. Later PowerPoints will talk about the election of 1800, Washington's administration, and Adams' administration. So, introduction to the Constitution. An important thing to remember is it was not the first form of government. So what was the first form of government? You need to watch my Know Me lesson to find that out. Okay, it was the Articles of Confederation. I'll spare you the suspense. Articles of Confederation was the first form of government, but you really need to watch my Know Me lesson to learn more about that. So one thing I also want you to know is it was not easily adopted or ratified. As I said in that Know Me lesson, it was very contentious. You know, we like to romanticize that our founders were these perfect, like, otherworldly beings that could do no wrong, that were like, we put them on this pedestal, but they were just like us. They weren't perfect people. They were just as messed up as we are, to be perfectly frank. So it's important to note that, because it's amazing what they accomplished. They were regular people who accomplished an amazing thing. So that should give us hope that we can do that too. Another important thing about the Constitution is you need to understand the historical timeline. If you don't know the order of events, if you haven't mastered chronological thinking, then understanding the Constitution is going to be kind of difficult. So I want you to keep that in mind. We need to know the order of events. And I want you to know this was a brand new form of government. Alexis de Tocqueville, who was a French guy who came to the United States in the 1800s, and he toured the U.S., and he wrote this book called Democracy in America. And he called America the great experiment for the world. And that's exactly what we are. We are the great experiment in self-government, and the experiment continues. So, first off, Articles of Confederation, which existed from 1781 to 1787. That was our first form of government. It was one branch. We had a legislative branch, and that was it. The states had the ability to ignore national directives. National directives are directions from the national government, okay? So, basically, the states could do whatever they wanted. The federal government couldn't force them to do anything, which was kind of a problem when you're trying to unify a country. The federal government could not assign taxes. They could not charge anybody taxes. They could not have an army. They could not make money. You know, they couldn't actually, like, produce currency. Each state was responsible for doing that on its own. And I want you to think about the disaster that might have been. Think about if right now each and every state had its own type of money. It would be really, really difficult to deal with that in our country now. Things are a lot easier because we have the dollar, and that's it. Everybody uses it, so it makes our economy function much more efficiently. And because they could not coin money, because they could not charge taxes, they also could not pay the Revolutionary War debt. And we owed a lot of money, and because of that, they couldn't protect us from foreign powers. They couldn't fight against the British if they came back in again, or if the French wanted a piece of the pie, or if the Spanish did. There was nothing the national government could do to really protect us. Even if they passed laws, they couldn't enforce any of them. So that was a major issue for our founders. So I know what you're thinking. There's so much on that slide. Oh my God, what am I supposed to put on my note card? It's okay, I'll help you. So note cards. You do not want to write everything down because you're not going to remember it all. There's just too much to write down. So you want to try to coalesce or combine the basic ideas of what you're looking at into a few key concepts so that you have the big picture idea of what's going on, and that will help you answer important questions. So here's an example here. I have the Articles of Confederation here, date, range, basic description. It was a confederal government. There was no strong national government. States could ignore directions from the national government. So the historical significance is that it was the first form of government in the U.S., it could not effectively govern the nation, and it created the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Those were its major accomplishments. So that's an example of a note card that you could make for the Articles of Confederation. We talked about a lot more stuff than just that, but if you combine all that stuff into those key ideas here, then it makes it a lot easier to remember. So, introduction to the Constitution, complex structure. It was all about limited government. It was based on a Federalist system. This is called Federalism. This should be reviewed for you guys from civics last year. So you should know what this is, but we're going to review it again. It was a division of power between a national government and several state governments. Okay, division of power between a big national government and several little state governments. Remember, we were the first nation to ever try this. But it's also important to remember that despite the fact we believed in natural rights and we were classical liberalists, we did fear tyranny of the majority. Our founding fathers were very afraid of the mob mentality. Many of them felt that the masses were uneducated and they were not prepared to actually govern. They did not know everything they needed to know in order to govern the nation properly. So we were afraid of the common man. It wasn't that we just thought the common man was great. We were concerned about this. So this is, I have a breakdown of the Constitution. I have it broken down into 4 basic parts. You have federalism, which is the basic foundation of our whole system. We have our 3 branches of government. We have separation of powers, and we have checks and balances. I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because this should all be review for you guys. So, we start here. We have the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. And I talked about them a little bit in my Know Me lesson. I'm going to talk about them more in a few minutes. Then we move into the 3 branches. We have a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judiciary, okay, our judicial branch. Those are our 3 branches of government. And what's important is we have a separation of powers between each of these branches, okay? Each branch is responsible for certain things. We also have checks and balances. Each branch checks and balances the powers of the other. So here's a more specific breakdown of separation of powers, what I just said. And our founders did this because they wanted to prevent a concentration of power. And with checks and balances, they wanted to make sure that no one branch had all of this power. So to help with the separation, they put into place rules that allowed each other branches to overrule the others. And so here we have a breakdown of what each branch does. So I'm not going to go into detail about this because you should know all about it, but you can check it out later. And Federalists versus Anti-Federalists. This one is really, really important. So the Federalists were Hamilton, Washington, and Adams. They were all about a strong central government. They thought the Articles of Confederation was bad times. They feared the common man making decisions, and they didn't think a Bill of Rights was necessary at all. The Anti-Federalists, the side of Jefferson and Madison and Patrick Henry, remember him from the Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech, they wanted a limited power to the central government. They did not want the central government to have a lot of power. They thought the Articles of Confederation were good times, great times even. They just needed to be tweaked a little bit. They did have faith in the common man to make decisions, and they absolutely needed a Bill of Rights. They said this was a gotta must. We absolutely must have this. So the Federalist Papers were produced by the Federalists. They were produced to convince people to adopt the Constitution. After we agreed on the Constitution and formed this whole new system of government, now we got to get people to buy into it. So these were 85 essays describing what it was they created and why we should do it. So these were the 3 authors over here, John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, also known as the father of the Constitution. And we have the dates there. The historical significance is that it successfully convinced people to ratify, and it served as a guide, and it still serves as a guide as the intent of the founders when we're looking at court decisions and how to rule on certain things. So Federalist number 10 is really, really important. I'm not going to go through all these key questions right now, but I just want to put them out there because when we read and talk about Federalist 10 in class, these are the key questions we're going to look at. So I just want to put these out there for you so that you know what to think about when you're reading it. Bill of Rights, first 10 amendments of the Constitution, very, very important. Anti-Federalists would not ratify without the Bill of Rights. So we really should all love the Anti-Federalists for this because all the rights that we have now, we thank the Anti-Federalists for that because without them, we wouldn't have the Bill of Rights, wouldn't have due process and all these other things that we have. But because of this back and forth between who should have the more authority, the federal government or the state governments, we have this thing that happens and it's called sectionalism. Okay, what's sectionalism? Well, it was a key problem from the very start of our country. And the basic definition is states' rights versus federal authority, this debate over who should have the power. Now, ironically, this is still a major debate right now. This is what we talk about with the Republicans versus the Democrats. How large of a role should government play and how many rights should states have to do what they want independent of the federal government? This is also going to be a major cause of the Civil War. So I want you to keep this in mind as we go forward for the rest of the year because this is really, really important concept. And that is the end of part 2. I hope this was useful and I will see you in part 3.